Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Sperling. I think we're still waiting for Rob and Dr. Hugh.
Okay.
So let's give him a few more seconds and then we will kick off.
I just heard Rob. Rob is joining us by phone because he's having internet connectivity problems. I guess that is the bane of working from home when everybody is working from home.
Very true, very true. In that case, let's kick it off. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are joining us from for this, the inaugural CJ Cinema Summit. We're coming to you at a very interesting time for cinemas, as I'm sure you're no doubt aware. There's a great quote from Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, where the main character, Nick, is asked, how did he go bankrupt? Two ways, he said. Gradually, and then suddenly. And that's pretty much where cinemas are today. The crisis that has been caused by the outbreak of the coronavirus is both gradual and sudden. It actually began really on the 23rd of January, when the cinemas in China closed literally overnight. And that meant that 1/3 of the screens around the globe were shut. What's been happening really is that the rest of the world has been catching up, and it's been catching up big time in the last week. A week ago, cinemas were shut in addition to China in Italy and Iran, but not many other places. Since then, pretty much the whole of Europe, North America, and the Middle East, as well as other territories like India, and now also countries in Southeast Asia have begun to shut their cinemas. So what we're going to try to do today is have a look about where we are today, what cinemas can and should be doing, what's going to happen next, and then we're going to look at what learnings there are from other territories, specifically China. We've had some good news today in the midst of all this gloom, because China, for the first time, recorded 0 new domestic cases of the coronavirus infection, and cinemas have reopened there. They don't have any films to show, but they are opening, so there is hope, and we can definitely learn from them. So with that, I would like to hand over, first of all, and introduce my colleagues who will be joining me for this seminar today. Some of them on screen, some of them by phone, and as you can tell, we are experiencing a few issues with just trying to get this going. Please bear with us. It's all very new for us too, but hopefully we'll get it working. So Sperling, if you can hear us, would you mind just introducing yourself? And if not, I'll do it for you. I should say, in addition to Sperling, we've got Rob Arthur, and here we go. It wouldn't be a discussion about the impact of the coronavirus if we didn't have a doctor joining us as well. In this case, it's Dr. Hugh, but
I'm not a clinical
but she's
doctor.
not a medical doctor. No.
Hello?
Hi, Dr. Hugh. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, you can just,
do you want to
just call me Hugh. I'm just to be clear, I'm not a clinical doctor.
I know. That's fine.
Hello?
We want you to give your expertise on China, so no medical knowledge required. If we can hear from Sperling as well and Rob, I'd like them to introduce themselves, but otherwise, while we wait for them, just a few housekeeping rules. So you're probably aware of, we have this wonderful platform, which we have Filmgrail to thank us for, and really a big thanks to Filmgrail for having enabled this. They came to us and suggested that they have this platform, and would we be interested in working with them, which of course we jumped on and put this together in very short notice. In addition, The Big Picture, Rob Arthur's company, was really instrumental in terms of putting together the program, the speakers, and the topics. So I really hope we can get Rob on the line and speak to him as well. But seeing that we've got Sperling, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, you can hear me, I take it.
I can.
Okay. Well, I'm Sperling Reich. I work with Patrick at Celluloid Junkie. I'm the executive editor of Celluloid Junkie. I'm also a partner at Convergent, and I'm here to answer any questions and kind of go over all of the research that we've been doing over the past week.
Great. If we can get Rob on the line, that'd be great. If not, I want to emphasize this is a free and open forum for information sharing. We're not here to sell you anything. We're not here to pitch you on anything. I'm sure there will be another time for that, but today is not the day. Today is just a day for sharing. So while we... Oh, and we have Rob. Rob, introduce yourself.
Thank you. So welcome to Scotland and broadband. We came up with this, I guess it's been work in progress over the last 48 hours. And it's been amazing to see so many people join the call. My role at the Big Picture is as senior consultant alongside colleagues John Sullivan, Judith Querford, and Mike Thompson. This came about again, I guess, last
still
week.
ongoing?
We work primarily in cinema with asset management, local authorities, governments, so on. And interestingly, I spent time in Shanghai alongside the authorities there, and in China. I met Dr. Hu the end of last year. I think it was something that was brewing while I was there. So very pleased to be back in the UK now. I'll pass you back to Patrick.
Thank you. And we're also trying to get connection with Dr. Hu, and I think we have her there. So, Dr. Hu, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly, if you can hear us? We've got a video connection. I don't know if she can hear us as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, Dr. Hu?
Can you?
Yes. Go ahead.
I'm from
We're having some audio problems, unfortunately. I think this... I had some problems hearing that, but what I want to say as well, we try to fix the line, is that Dr. Hu has been instrumental in UK-China film collaboration. She's based in London, but travels extensively between UK and China in terms of trying to promote exchange of films and ideas. So we want to hear from her a bit later on today, but I want to get on to the first section. So we're going to spend roughly 15 minutes for each section. And the first one I want to do is really to do a global overview of where cinemas stand today. And that's really 4 topics. This is what's happening to cinemas as we've had closures, then look at the films that have been postponed, briefly talk about the film productions that have been delayed. We're going to look fourthly at the film trade events and where they stand. And finally, we're going to address the big troll in the room, which is streaming. So beginning really on the cinema closures, and I want to rope in Rob Arthur on this. It is today probably easier to say which territories haven't yet shut their cinemas rather than the ones that have, because in rapid succession, we had, after Italy, most of Europe, UK, followed by North America, United States. The Gulf territories were early ones. And now we're seeing also closures in Southeast Asia. So it's only really Latin America, parts of Russia, where it's regional decisions, and Africa and Australia, New Zealand, where cinemas largely remain open. But the question is for how long? So probably by our estimates, more than 2/3 of the screens around the globe are closed today. And this is obviously an unprecedented situation. We've never been in a situation like this before, not after 9/11, not during the war. So the first thing I want to talk to you is, Rob, can you really fill us in on what sort of legal implications of or ramifications of cinema closures in terms of insurance specifically and Act Major? I know that in the UK, there was a lot of controversy around the fact that the government didn't mandate closures, but encouraged people not to go. And instead, the cinemas themselves were forced to take the decision of shutting their doors. So, Rob, if you can hear me?
Yes, I can. I think that there's a range of pieces around this. If you take, say, the local authorities or national government, and that might be NGOs in other markets outside the UK, but in Europe. So if there's government policies enacted or local government or the license authorities, they could all trigger a closure, but it's an enforced closure. So my sense is that operators have been planning for this, not necessarily for a long time, but have had to work this through, but have been, I'll give an example in two close to me, Moldova and Kazakhstan, where there was enforcement positions taken. The cinemas had to close at that time, although there was limited COVID impact in those territories, but it's just had as a catalytic effect. Belarus as well, another. So the insurance position, I'd say that's business disruption, gross profit protection. It could be stock valuation. There's a range of insurance points there. Piece that I've heard though is that because COVID-19 wasn't a known virus, it may not be covered. That has implications.
But the definition of a pandemic is that we don't know the virus. That's kind of why they become pandemics. Yeah. I mean,
the insurance provision was that all known viruses, not necessarily a future virus. But I've looked through several policies, and it's open. That's open. So I guess check the policies, check the process. Insurance policies are open to question. Some territories have better provisions than others. So I spoke to France. There was no business interruption provision in a lot of cinemas there, but it's more prevalent elsewhere. The force majeure, there's cases in India at the moment. There's also a really good article put up by Denton's that is worth looking through. But again, contentious, may or may not. I think the implications at the moment are with everything else going on, there are legal implications, but how long will that take to resolve?
Yes. Well, and there are also, when it comes to insurance, and I'd love to hear from cinema operators about what they're experiencing, if they're allowed to say. But I know at least in North America, there are some clauses where if the government shuts you down, then you can't do business, and that kind of triggers certain force majeure and certain insurance clauses. But with if you just decide to close on your own, then that doesn't trigger any insurance clauses. That I believe is what's happening with Cineworld in the UK.
And we're going to get on to later in the discussion really what it is that cinemas can do in terms of seeking support, seeking relief, and trying to find a way to finance themselves through this period. So if we move on from these cinema closures, because we'll get on to remedial action.
Before you do that, if I could just point out one thing about Latin America. Latin America is, in Chile and Argentina, all the cinemas are closed. In Brazil, they're going state by state. So the cinemas in Brazil, like Rio, for instance, are closed, and I believe Salvador. Mexico is still open. But the one thing that's interesting about what's happening in Latin America is the cinemas aren't closing necessarily because of COVID-19 or coronavirus. They're closing because there's no content for them. So they would very much like to remain open, even though life has pretty much stopped. From what everybody I talked to in Sao Paulo, nobody's on the streets and life has stopped. That's anecdotal, certainly. But it's interesting to note that the closures are mostly due to content, which might be why Mexican cinemas, which are still for the most part open from what we've been told, that's why the content issue might wind up closing them down.
And I see we've got a comment from Phil Clapp of UK Cinema Association saying that's certainly the case for overwhelming majority of cinemas in the UK, that there is no insurance cover. And we're seeing other people commenting there's no insurance cover in Denmark as well. But your point, Sperling, is a very good segue into the next segment, which is about the delayed and postponed releases of films. Before we get into the Trolls situation, it's almost hard to keep up with the number of films that have been delayed, but do we even know how many of them have a fixed new release date and how many of them are just sort of waiting and seeing?
Well, ultimately, when there was some thinking that that this might last just a week or two, people started to, the studio started to actually date their films. That kind of stopped when it became very obvious that this was not going to be just a 1 week incident. This was going to be probably a 2 month occurrence. So we have everything from the James Bond, which did open November, is scheduled now to open November 23rd, to Mulan just being delayed, to Fast and Furious 9, which does have a date, but in 2021. But then if you were opening between now and even the end of May, you're probably delayed. So that's The New Mutants, which was originally going to be released April 3rd, 2020, no date to be determined. You can see here on the screen, everything from The Artist's Wife to A Quiet Place 2, which has no date yet. And Peter Rabbit 2, of course, was one of the early movers, so they picked a date, which was August 7th. I mean, I could go on, but if you have a release date between now and probably the end of May, beginning of June, you probably are not going to be seeing those films released. Now, the question that all distributors are asking is, what do we do? That gets us into the Trolls issue, but that's most are just trying to figure out, what do we do theatrically? Where do we place these films theatrically? On what day? On what release date? Because otherwise, there's going to be a logjam.
And interesting, we have covered that issue on Celluloid Junkie, to give it a little plug, in the profiles of Gower Street and Jim Amos's piece as well. So if you haven't read them, I urge you to visit Celluloid Junkie there. And we will be keeping people updated, and we'll try to see if we can do an overview of the films that have shifted. But picking up on the point that it's interesting that two of the first films to announce a new date were from Universal, in terms of Bond moving to November and Fast and Furious 9 moving to 2021. So let's circle back to that when we talk about Trolls. But it's not just films that are being postponed, it's actual film productions which are being shut down and delayed. And are we going to see a gap then between this backlog of films and between potential new films, not to mention TV shows as well, Sperling?
Well, with TV shows, it used to be, and I know this is more of a cinema call, with TV shows, there used to be 22 episodes per season. So you could shut down and actually there were hiatuses where production would shut down for months at a time. And then they would go into a pilot season. In fact, March, April, June, that was pilot season. And then everybody would go back to work in July and August for the fall season. However, we've all kind of taken up the UK and European model now all over the world, where a season might be 8 episodes, it might be 13 episodes, and then you don't get another season for sometimes a year. So with television, everything has been stopped, at least in Los Angeles. Nothing is happening in Los Angeles. And because of that, that brings us back to film. You've seen things like Avatar, which is shooting in New Zealand, and New Zealand only today closed down their borders for external residents. All production for the most part has stopped, especially that production that is going through any Hollywood studio, mainly because post-production facilities here in Los Angeles, in New York, they're all shut down. So if you're working with any of those facilities, you're probably not actually going to be able to go into production or continue production. And so we've had everything from the latest Mission Impossible shut down. Matrix 4 was shooting in San Francisco. That was shut down. Avatar, the sequels to Avatar were shut down. And of course, there's an unknown number of unknown films that aren't necessarily sequels, but they're independent films that have all shut down. Nobody is working.
And I suppose it's too early to say how soon production will resume and whether they will be massively delayed when they come out. But then again, if we both have films that are in the can, proverbially, being postponed, and new films, then hopefully those delays will match up. But there'll be a serious rejigging,
right.
I take.
Well, we've got this 2-month window right now, pardon the window pun, if you will, where we're taking all the films and we can move them and shift them to different parts of, timed, essentially, different parts of the future, where a film that was supposed to open in April of this year can now maybe open in January, February, March of next year, where the film that was shooting now for February and March of next year may not actually be released until May, June, July of next year.
And Claire actually raised the point in the Q&A, which I was going to bring up, which is, does that mean that Hollywood's forgotten about the writer's strike, or could we get another calamity coming just as we start reshooting again? Well,
it's kind of funny that you should mention that. Well, funny is maybe a bad word, but the writer's strike seems like it was eons ago. This fear of the writer's strike. The writer's strike, the Writers Guild of America, that could be a whole subject of its own webinar. And really I'm going to try and make a very long story short here. The writers fired their agents last year over all the packaging of television shows, over affiliated productions where agencies were actually producing television shows and movies and content. I'm going to skip to the part where the Writers Guild of America was supposed to be negotiating right now a new contract with the producers, with the studios, with the networks. They tried to put that clause into their demands. That clause was removed about 2 weeks ago. It's called the Collins Clause. That clause was removed. So the likelihood of a writer strike kind of ratcheted down quite a bit, especially since the Directors Guild of America also reached an agreement with the AMPTP, the studios, the networks, and producers. Due to pattern bargaining, what the Writers Guild of America will do is follow the DGA. However, there had been a little bit of semi-stockpiling for what seemed like it might be an extended writer strike. I have a feeling, given all that's going on right now, that's not going to occur.
Well, we had a good suggestion from Wes coming in the chat section here. Can't they just get the strike out of the way now? Which somehow I doubt.
Oh, that's a good point. That's actually somebody should contact the WGA with that. That's actually a really good idea.
You're the man. Moving on to the next section, which is the closure and delay of trade events. We just had the announcement today that the Cannes Lions Advertising Festival, which takes place in June, is going to be shifted to October. We still don't know if the Cannes Film Festival is going ahead. But of course, in the meantime, we now know CinemaCon is not going to be happening. And Cine Europe, we don't know also, but at least there we will have a definite answer by the 4th of May on whether it's going ahead or not. I wanted to bring in Rob on this, both you, Sperling, in terms of, 4th of May does seem enough of a time for us delegates, but I suppose people have to build stands as well. And there are also tougher decisions financially to be made by operators, especially cinemas, whether to send people to this event. What's your take on this?
You're asking me.
I think it's a real challenge, Patrick.
Sorry.
A real challenge at that time. And if you take, say, the closure plans that are going through now, with the social isolation, the cash, the issues around the locations in the business, will the locations be up and running by that time? Being able to take time out of the business to go to a conference and trade show, and I think they're really, really important events, but at the same time, where there's tens or hundreds of thousands of people that are being laid off at the moment, to then go away from the business, where there might be programming issues again. So I think there's a need for a forum or forums, but how that works this year, I think 2020 is definitely the anomaly of all. I'll hand over to Sperling.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the question was what events will be canceled. I mean, you already see the Tribeca Film Festival canceled. You see, I believe it was the Sydney Film Festival canceled. Certainly South by Southwest was canceled. CinemaCon was unfortunate. I mean, I think we were hoping upon hope that would occur, and I know how devastating it is for this industry, really, and not to mention NATO, not to mention CinemaCon itself. I know the studios were supporting it right up until the very end, and unfortunately, once the President of the United States kind of put a travel ban in place, it was almost impossible to hold that event. And I know that they didn't want to shut it down. But as far as Cannes goes, the problem, and Rob, you kind of pointed on this, is what will happen. All of the films that would appear in Cannes would be finished right about now. They would be kind of in post-production, and all of the marketing and promotion behind them would be gearing up right now, not to mention the fact that all of the talent and the creatives that would go to Cannes, a lot of them may not want to go. And so that's really going to be the struggle for Cannes, is actually getting completed films, the films that they have selected. Some of them they are selecting right now aren't actually complete. Can they be completed? And if so, can they actually make it to the Croisette? And this is coming from somebody who wants to go to Cannes, who's been to Cannes 21 years in a row, but it may become a logistical impossibility.
Yeah. Dr. Hugh pointed out that Marche de Film is going virtual. And we have also lots of other people commenting in the questions and answer session about other events which are being cancelled and postponed. Teleridge, Sheffield Dockfest, we'll find out. I know that we also had an announcement that the Edinburgh Film Festival is moving, so a blow for you, Rob, if they let you out of the house by then. But wait and see.
Patrick is coming in. I think the key piece here is that I'm just reading what Serge is saying. He's saying as well, but technical suppliers and stakeholders, there's a real need for people to meet, whether they be seat manufacturers, digital projector providers, sound installation. There's future developments in cinema, but those forums are going to be really challenged this year. So that for all stakeholders, from film festivals to suppliers, the whole chain is impacted right now.
Yeah. And it should be emphasized, the point is made here in the comments section, that many of these events have not been cancelled. They've been postponed, or we're waiting to hear if they're going to be delayed or reshuffled. The one thing that is cancelled, not postponed this year, is unfortunately the Eurovision Song Contest. Doesn't apply to cinema, but a great blow for us Swedes, because we do like our Eurovision Song Contest. But moving on now to the troll in the room. Obviously, there was a bombshell this week when Universal announced that Trolls 2 World Tour would not be going on a tour of cinemas. In fact, it would be streaming directly to consumers for about $20, bypassing effectively cinemas, most of which would be shut by then, and that there would be other films available too. The Invisible Man, Emma, and The Hunt would equally be distributed straight to home through various platforms, many of which were owned by Universal's parent company, Comcast. So maybe this was really a NBC Comcast Sky decision of releasing films. Obviously, cinemas were not happy about this. We have since heard other studios which are experimenting with loosening the windows. Disney said they were going to release Frozen 2 on Disney Plus slightly earlier than planned, although it was already out on DVD. The latest Star Wars film would be coming out on DVD earlier, and I think Warner Brothers were also going to advance Harley Quinn Birds of Prey on paper platform. There was a further announcement even this morning. We're trying to keep up with Sony Pictures saying that Bloodshot is going to be made available direct to consumers in the home, having just been out for a week. Although, Sperling, to me, that one seems like it's just a question of bad timing, whereas the Universal decisions seem to be more thought through and intentional, maybe even to upset cinemas. What's your take?
Well, you kind of mentioned that it might have been thought through. It seemed, well, given the fact that you have Universal moving Bond very early, you have them moving Peter Rabbit very early. They were obviously already looking at their release schedule. I know Kat J asked in the Q&A section what's going to happen with the release schedule. The distributors we've talked to have said, yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen with the release schedule. They know that there might be some crowding. They know that there might be some kind of a bottleneck, and that's what they're going to try and prevent by spacing out their films. Obviously, Disney's not going to release 4 animated films in one weekend. However, getting back to Trolls, with Frozen 2, as you mentioned, that's not really breaking any windows. It was already being released on DVD. The only thing they did was move up the streaming of their own film only on their own platform. And again, that's only in North America. There aren't, Disney Plus is not available everywhere. And with the other 3 films, The Hunt, Emma, and The Invisible Man, the reality is the window was not really broken so much as blurred, because, and I'm working on a piece right now about this for CJ, which is, they could not, those films were already in theaters. When theaters reopen, the immediate audience for those would have evaporated. So they are trying to recoup the money that they would have possibly made on those films by doing premium VOD. What is being done with Bloodshot by Sony is actually electronic sell-through, so digital download. It's not actually a video on demand per se. The difference, and this is the point of my CJ piece, is that there's, I guess, a good way and a bad way, for lack of a better word, to say something. And the way Universal did it was they just kind of came out, said it. I don't know how many people they told. It seems, based on everybody we've talked to, that nobody knew about this. In fact, there are some territories that had to receive emails. The exhibitors were receiving emails when they woke up saying, "Hey, you may have heard about this. It happened while you were asleep." And it was, they were seeing these emails from Universal in their territories. And then in Australia, for instance, it hasn't been, it's been delayed. It's not going to go to VOD. So I guess the way Universal did it, it made it sound like this was the path forward, that they were going to be releasing films directly to premium VOD and when theaters open, maybe they'll keep doing it. Whereas Sony, what they said was, in the second paragraph of their press release, they are going to be honoring the theatrical window moving forward. It's just for this one film where it opened 5 days prior to every theater in pretty much the world being closed. They were going to try and find an audience for this film.
And if we're looking at the studios, I mean, Universal has always been the one that's perhaps been the most aggressive in terms of looking at the shortening of the window. There was a precedent, wasn't there, in 2011?
Tower Heist, yes, where they said, we're going to release this film, I believe it was 21 days after it premieres theatrically. We're going to release it to premium video on demand in about 1 or 2 cities just as a test. And in the end, they, theater owners pushed back and they did not do that.
Well, I made the suggestion earlier today on LinkedIn, which is that if Universal wants to regain some goodwill with the cinemas, maybe once cinemas reopen, they should offer them Trolls to screen for free, where the cinemas keep 100% of the box office as a gesture of goodwill. But I've heard from exhibitors who have said that they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, and I think there will be ramifications for Universal.
The exhibitors I've talked to, especially the film buyers, say, this was actually a very dangerous move for them, for Universal. I don't know how true that is or whether it's just big talk, but that effectively, film buyers will be taking it out on Universal in the terms and in the settlements moving forward. I think that's probably a short-lived phenomenon.
Well, they'll definitely be wanting Bond, and they'll be wanting Fast.
Certainly, nobody appreciated it.
Yeah. Let's wrap up this part, but I'm sure it's a subject we're going to be coming back to as we monitor which studios are doing what in terms of where they're planning the releases, what's going to go out online. There's still nervousness, but I think there hasn't quite been the domino effect after Trolls, which people feared. And like you said, Bloodshot probably just was a case of bad timing. I'd like to move on now to the third section of today's webinar, which is a kind of 10-point action plan of what cinemas should be thinking about and doing as they're shutting down. Obviously, not all cinemas have shut down. Maybe some will avoid shutdown altogether. But this is based on an article which we began preparing about 3 weeks ago, actually, based on what was happening in China. The problem is there's never a good time to tell cinemas that, look, you may have to face a worst case scenario. And these are the kind of things that you should be thinking about. So things were happening so fast, there wasn't a good time to publish it. And we're also mindful that we at CJ are outsiders. It is very presumptuous of us to try to be seen to be lecturing the cinema business about how they should be running the business. But we really mean this as ways of offering advice, things to think about. And I want to highlight some of the aspects together with both Rob and Sperling here, because as we go into this, we should also remember this is not just a devastating blow for our industry. This is a personal tragedy for hundreds of thousands, over 100,000 people who work in the cinema, who face a very
that's just in North America. That's just in North America.
Absolutely. I mean, there are people whose livelihoods depend on cinema. Many of them are on 0-hour contracts, which means they might not have sick pay, unemployment benefits, or be guaranteed any kind of compensation. Their business simply shut down one day, and they don't know when they'll have work again. They don't know when they'll have money. So we are very mindful of this, and we know that this is an extra hard time for them. But now that we've said that, we want to kind of dive into the 10-point action plan of things to think about for cinemas. And Robin Sperling, I'd like you to chip in here as we go along. The first point is really the obvious one, which is one that cinemas, like other businesses, have to follow the advice of the local health authorities, governments, whether regional or national, and the licensing authorities. Some of them are told to shut down. In the case of the UK, They were advising audiences to stay away, so cinemas had to take the tough decision. But unfortunately, we're at a stage now where in most countries, that decision has been made for them. And it's really just a question then of compliance. Rob, do you want to talk a little about the implications for license to trade or things such as business interruption insurance?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we've covered business interruption previously, and there were good comments coming back. But I think in terms of that there are implications around trying to trade without a license. We've also seen just limited numbers of seats per screen enacted or reducing capacity in individual cinemas. And I think I go back to the first part you raised about staff, tens of thousands or so, at least in the US, plus the ancillary services and jobs. Businesses or locations internationally, I'd give Saudi Arabia as an example. They've just been gearing up to open up cinemas. There's been government policy, which is in some respects being enforced, Vision 2030, open up, move at such a fast pace, and then almost immediately close back down. So for those operators, that's really distressing. And that's happening in other markets around.
No, it's true. We're getting good comments also. It's not just cinema staff that's being affected. People who work for film festivals are also impacted. And for many of them, this is a once a year occurrence. So it's a very big blow to them. The second point of the 10-point list really ties in with that, which is talk to the HR department, the human resources. You have to review what your employee contracts say, what your management contracts say in terms of preparing to furlough, whether it's suspending people, hopefully, as opposed to laying people off. There's also the very important issue, whatever you do, communicate it to staff. Staff are worried. The best thing you can do as a cinema operator is just be in close contact with them. Even if you don't know it, just communicate with them. I'm sure most of you are doing this already, but the point about communication is one that's been drilled into me time and time again.
Yeah, which is what we're trying to do here, by the way. That's exactly.
Yeah, so the staff communication, the management communication, talking to all your contracts and stakeholders out there, everyone, there's implications. It could be to the general cleaners on site who don't get access, people who work 6 or 7 hours a week, up to those full-time management on site, and the administration staffs at offices. But I take the point, festivals as well, that they're either once or twice a year or limited events, and you're planning for a date or a week. That's really critical, and they take on a whole load of people, whether it be from trade associations or groupings, to make those events work. So it's really critical. And I to put some context around this as well, Patrick. The 10 points that you are raising put into this area, this isn't like it's being done over a month or 6 months. This is actually like for an independent operator. So this, in some respects, has to happen in a day. When an enforcement comes in, you may do some pre-planning. And I think it's really distressing for the independent operators, one-man bands or so, working this through. And it's also equally distressing for major operations with tens of thousands of people to deal with.
And as James C. points out, there is a fund that started, I believe, out of New York, a GoFundMe that started in New York.
There is GoFundMe. There are various government initiatives, which we're going to get to and try to mention as well. So that's still coming ahead. But let's just continue running down the list. And by the way, we're going to try to share this list online for anybody who wants access to it. It's something which, again, most of you will probably have thought of. And it is something, as Rob pointed out, that many had to have a crash course in and think about in the space of 24 or 48 hours. But the next point is an important one, which is have the discussion with your landlords, the people whose lease you have for operating, and advise them on things such as, can they agree to maybe have a rent deferral? Could there be a rent holiday? There was recently, I saw in the UK today in London, that there's the landlord for the food and beverage and retail installations at the King's Cross station have given all of their clients a 3-month rent holiday. really one question for you, for Rob. How reasonable is it to be asking landlords to, effectively accept to not get any money?
I've gone through the process before, and as much as it's a really uncomfortable situation, it's also the right thing to do. I believe that the landlords, asset managers, or so can be realistic. Now, some are very different to others, but they'll be realistic in the circumstances. And I put it in context that cinemas are some of the best tenants in any location, anywhere in the world. They're, in some ways, they're revered in locations. In the UK, the US, historically, they've paid rent. They've supported shopping centres. They've been strong tenants for the long term. Some retailers only take 4 or 5 year lease provisions, whereas cinema operators historically have taken 20 to 25 years. And I'm having interesting conversations. One is about today, the uncertainty and the negativity around it. But the secondary provisions are what's happening in 18 months, 2 years. And landlords, especially town centres, city centres, they want cinemas to be there. So they're willing to have a look short term now, but look through to the future and make sure that cinema is part of that process. So I think that gives some leverage to today's discussions.
And that's a good point, the fact that cinemas are good tenants in general. We see more ups and downs with the restaurant or the hospitality business, famously the retail apocalypse with shops going out of business because people's spending patterns are moving online. So hopefully landlords will take a long-term view and accept that there must be some shared pain in these exceptional circumstances.
Well, and as far as employees go, we're hearing from Estonia and Finland will cover, in Estonia, 70% of employees' salaries. In Finland, the union of employees will cover the salaries for up to 90 days. We're hearing the same thing in different, and this is all in the comments coming in, so thank you very much, that some European governments, Steve K says, will be paying staff between 50 and 90%, depending on the government.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I think in Denmark, the government offered to pay 75% of salaries up to a certain cap if the company promised to pay the other 25% and promised not to lay them off. So we're seeing tremendous measures. We've also seen in Italy where there have been specific financial decrees put in place specifically for the hospitality, entertainment, and tourist industry. We saw NATO pledging $1 million from their reserve fund to help that. So all of this on top of the GoFundMe and other things hopefully mean that there will be support for the kind of stuff. What we've also seen, I don't know if we're going to get to this later, but we've seen cinemas urge that patrons can do things for the cinema, especially small and independent cinemas, where you can buy a gift card for future redemption, or if you've already bought a ticket, then don't ask for a refund. Maybe let the cinema have that as kind of a donation to them. So there are things that we as individuals can do. As trade bodies, we can apply pressure. We can also lobby the government. So hopefully all of these streams together will mean that, we can see this through.
Yeah, I think I wanted just to emphasize.
Yeah, I think it was Karina Longworth of You Must
So I was just going to highlight that this isn't a result of bad practice, bad business. These are well-run, generally well-run, operating, trading, efficient businesses. Yes, with some debt, but that's to be expected. It's cash flow. It's cash flow now, and it's cash flow projections going forward, and that's really distressing for the operators or the festivals or the events. Dr. Allison had picked up a really good point just as well in terms of, say, footfall. Cinemas are the biggest footfall driver to any shopping centre, any town centre, anywhere. And property developers listening in know that, and they're well aware of it, and that'll be today and going forward. But we're in a challenging place.
Yeah. Sperling?
I was just going to highlight what you said regarding the kind of supporting Karina Longworth, who produces a very good podcast called You Must Remember This. She suggested that, in this time, if you were going to go to the cinema, why not go and buy a gift card in the amount of money that you would have spent at the cinema, but buy it for that cinema.
No, definitely support your local.
She's a film critic here in the U.S.
Yep. The next point on the list, we're trying to rush through it now. For cinemas, talk to distributors, and above all, send them the message that apply the pressure for them not to release the films online. Films that were meant to have a theatrical release down the line shouldn't end up online. Ideally, now, we don't want to see replications probably of Universal, but that message needs to be coming through loud and clear individually. Now, that decision probably wasn't made by the distributors, theatrical distributors at Universal, probably higher up the food chain. But still, the more they hear from their clients that there will be repercussions if they don't decide to hold off for the theatrical to become available as the primary window. So that's really another important message to send them, as well as having discussions.
Patrick,
Go on ahead, Rob.
I've seen in the email correspondence with me and the feedback, and when we've had to close down a cinema this week, the empathy from the distributors, the localized level, because they feel for those people. They're talking to people day to day, has been really positive and really supportive. Because everyone at the distribution local levels and in the operational side, and that's country by country, are really feeling hurt. And in some territories, they're the same. It's department by department, office to office. That makes it more challenging.
True. Running through the list, I want to keep us roughly on time. We've mentioned this point already, but petition your government, your local government, for tax breaks, for deferred payments, and try to figure out the process of how to fill up the forms adequately to get this kind of money, or to try to get a help from your institutions, whether federal, local, or national. And again, that's something which small operators will probably need more help in than big operators. So the trade bodies should ideally be able there to assist you. The next point
to share the NATO report or the presentation that came out yesterday. That's really helpful and may be possible to tailor into local market.
Absolutely. The next point could be an overlooked one, which is review your concessions inventory. Obviously, there's a lot of food stuff in the cinemas, and all of that will have an expiry date. Now, some of those things will last longer. I sometimes wonder if the hot dog lasts forever. That's a cheap joke. They are much better these days. But it's worth noting that this is what happened in China. In China, they stocked up massively on concessions because they were just about to go into the Lunar New Year festival, the biggest box office time in the Chinese release calendar. And so they had tremendous amount of inventory to get rid of. Some of it, the popcorn, they ended up feeding to chickens in some locations. In other locations, they actually sold combo packages through online retailers to deliver to people. So you could get a bag of nachos and sweets and a drink delivered to you, usually for prices below those of supermarkets. So there are many things you could be doing with the inventory that you have, and also canceling any orders and sending whatever you can back. The worst thing would be obviously to have to throw it away, because it would be tremendously wasteful. Now, with people stuck in their homes, it's not easy to just give it out on the streets as a gesture of goodwill, and there are health and safety implications. But do have a think about the best way that you can handle your inventory, given the fact that it might be months before you open shop again, and nobody wants popcorn that old, even if it's carefully vacuum packed.
Well, and I saw the on the Q&A in the chat room. I mean, the comments are coming in fast. We're going to try to summarize them and kind of post them at some point, and there will be a recording of this. But it was suggested that Uber Eats might actually be working with cinemas to deliver certain concessions. I know they did that in China.
Yeah, well, people having that.
Steve came in and said, I give your food to the perishable food to food banks. I think the other piece is make sure you do the stock inventory before you close. Stock valuation will be potentially covered by insurance and business interruption.
Yep. Very good point. The next point is a big one, and Sperling, maybe you can pull up some of the documents or websites. This is how to power down safely. As a cinema operator, you might already have done that in terms of powering down your projection and server equipment, but there are safe ways of doing that. And really what you should be doing is turn to your integrators and to your supplier. Fortunately, there have been very helpful online documentations, and primarily I want to take your attention to what has been published by Cinema Next, which if you go onto the website, you will see that they have a document which outlines the kind of different models, because the way to power down a Christie projector can be different from a Barco projector, from an NEC projector, from a Sony projector, then what to do in terms of batteries and so on. There are many, many things to think about. Another document which was also put on equally helpful was by Harkness Screen, really the power behind the cinema technology community, sent to me by Richard Mitchell. If we can get that up as well. I don't know if there's a space we can put those links on this website, but really search them out via either Cinema Next or CTC, the Cinema Technology Community, or Harkness Screen. Because what you do not want is for your equipment to be damaged simply because it was powered down the wrong way, or it was left unattended for too long and the battery might have gone down, or there could be other issues. So we are in a business that is geared up to operate 364 to 365 days per year. We are in a very uncharted territory where cinema equipment will be lying idle for 1, 2, or maybe even 3 or more months. So please, talk to your integrators, talk to your manufacturers, and power down and store it safely. There's also issues of cleaning, service contracts related to this, all of the things to think about. Moving on swiftly, double check your security. Obviously, if you have an empty cinema, it can attract thieves, vandals, squatters, arsonists. I don't mean to be alarmist, but these are things to think about. Unfortunately, cinema are a soft and easy target for these kind of things. And it's not just the physical security you have to worry about. You also have to keep thinking about your online security as well. This is a prime attempt to hack those cinemas. And also simple things like banking all your cash. There are many, many security aspects to be here thinking about it. Moving on next, we have, if you're still in VPF, if you have virtual print fee contract, review that contract and see what it says, whether it's time-based or play-based, and have a discussion with the company that you signed that VPF contract in terms of how that will function if your cinema is closed for 2 months. Rob, do you want to add anything to those few points?
I think the key in that one is basic. Just pick up on Kevin's point. Just bank all your cash, bank all the floats, make sure that gift vouchers or anything that's got a residual or remedial value is locked secure and stock counted or so. That's, again, it's going back to that. All these things are happening within a 28, 40 hour period. So making sure you've got trusted supporters along with you at that time.
Yes, and unfortunately,
we're hearing from
Go ahead, Sperling.
I was just going to say, it looks like Serge Plash has said that Barco and Cineonic will publish recommendations as well before the end of the week.
Good.
I mean, this is the kind of, I mean, we're getting updates literally live as we go. Real
time. I feel like a sports commentator. Yeah. Next point, which is if your cinema chain has an unlimited refund or gift card, please consider that. In fact, we've heard from some of the big chain operators that the subscription schemes, the charges will be halted or paused for such things like AMC Stubs A-List and the Cineworld Unlimited card. But there are recurring kind of expenses, and it's very important that customers don't feel that they're being charged for something unfairly. So communicate again with the customer if you haven't done that already. Many of you have. I have seen a lot of very good emails and a lot of very good messages from cinemas to their customers, people on their mailing list explaining why they have to shut down, how much of a heartbreak it is, and how they're planning to be back very soon. So we're going to get into the communication that. And it's really important to keep that relationship alive with your customers, even during dark days, that you can still update them by having a regularly email newsletter, even just to tell them that you're working on getting back to business as soon as possible. Another point is really to try to make this time, dark time, as productive as you can, given the limitations of fact of people being sequestered at home. But there are still things you can do, such as remote staff training. You can have strategy meetings. You can have regular updates. There's really is an opportunity for trying to think about what it is else that you can be doing for your staff and for your customers remotely. So keep that in mind as well. Running down the list.
That's a piece, Patrick, just in
Go ahead.
terms of Debbie raised earlier, just about staff development, training, making sure that they are not seen as being key parts of the business. Now, challenge at the moment is, I guess, trying to retrain. It's who will you retrain at the moment if all the staff have gone, and it comes back to the balance between cash flow and staff balance.
Yeah,
very, very challenging.
Some cinemas, next point is they've got new builds underway. They've got construction projects. Obviously, those things cost money, but may not be able to stop them unless for health and safety that construction workers are not allowed out because of the restrictions on assembly or because of other health related issues. But very quickly, Rob, because we're running way over time here, do you see opportunities for cinemas to maybe do things such as, refurbs while they're empty, again, subject to health and safety and corona related working restrictions?
I was looking at that this week. I think if it's desktop development, that makes it easier. But if it's on-site construction, that may be a challenge because you're talking about a larger quantity of people working together. And that's, I guess, a social mobility issue may be a problem. May also come back to what stage of the development is the project at, and is there a contractual obligation to move forward at the moment? And I certainly read some of the investor reports over the last 2-3 weeks, and new developments may be curtailed or cut back if there's a cash flow issue. So I think that's certainly a moving position at the moment. It depends on, I guess, the next stage or how long will this be in position.
Seeing some great comments here. There was a case earlier that York Art House Cinemas in Berlin have done a tie-up with Mubi, the online streamer, which is a big friend of cinemas, I should say, with our Mubi Go program of allowing, giving their patrons a free cinema visit, a curated one every week. But there's an interesting tie-up and partnership between York and Mubi where they give their members access to Mubi streaming service for art house films for a certain amount of period. Let me continue on.
Actually, Imtiaz has a very good point here. He says, he or she, I don't know who this person is, said, as a data analyst, he would spend some time reviewing your data, analyze your data. All that, you always say you don't have time to look at the data and to crunch your data. Well, guess what? We now have the time.
Yeah. Tidy up that email mailing list that you'd be meaning to prune and weed. So next one is really try to limit your cash burn. Look over your expenditures, the fixed ones. You may have to cancel travel plans. You may have to cut down the number of people that you send to Cine Europe if you're planning to do that, which we hope you are going ahead. But just keep the cash burn low. And it also ties in with a point which I've seen other companies have done in the situation, which is this applies to the big cinema chain. If you're a CEO of one of the medium to large size cinema chain, who is paid usually very generously, consider taking maybe a 20% salary cuts. I've seen other companies where this has been done. It makes for better optics than to be reminded of just how many millions the remuneration package is for the CEO of the largest cinema chains in the world. I'm not going to name any names or figures, but you can find out quite easily who they are. So please consider ways of sharing the pain and showing solidarity with all of your staff if you're one of the better paid cinema chains. Obviously, for smaller independents, that's not really an option. And finally, and this we want to get into, which is the plan for reopening. We're going to talk about a little bit about, if we have time, what's happening in China. And there's also been a wonderful document that was published today on LinkedIn from Demetrios from Gower Street Analytics. So there are a lot of resources and learnings already, but having really wrapped up this kind of top 10 ideas, we'd like to hear from you as well. What insights do you have to share for us with the wider community? And with that, I now want to move on to the third part, which is the what's likely to happen next.
If you can, Patrick, I would like to point out something. We do hope to continue these conversations, hopefully if it works out, maybe even on a weekly basis. So please let us know who you think should be joining us. Hopefully we'll get the tech worked out. So there'll be just more than two faces here. Let us know the topics that you want to discuss. Let us know the people that you want to hear from, whether it's distributors or exhibitors or trade groups. Let us know. And you can email us tips@celluloidjunkie.com. You can post them here in the chat room, and we will be letting us know.
Yeah, and thank you for all the great comments. We're going to try to capture and summarize some of them. But moving on now, which is really, we've talked about shutting down. What's going to happen next? So we've got really 4 points here, which I want to hand over to Rob Arthur to talk through some of them. Mindful that we've been going for almost an hour, so we don't want to keep you for too long. We want to do this and then talk a little bit about what's happening in China, because cinemas are reopening in China. There is some good news to finish this webinar with. So Rob, handing over to you.
I think that the key is, I was looking through this, I guess in more detail, is just how long will this position take, how long will this continue for? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Is it longer? We're doing, if you take, say, from the starting point in China, first case, the closure there started in January 23rd. And as you said, Patrick, they're just about to move into an opening phase now. So that's a key piece. But then there's the ongoing customer communication and the ongoing staff communication that needs to be addressed, whether it be HR, financial costing. MT has raised the data, and then government development agency support, and then looking whether it be your shareholders or stakeholders and funding around that. So I think that is what happens during that next phase. But I would summarize these next stages. It's preparing for the reopening, when and how, what basis. The reopening and what happens there, it's a bit like a refurbishment or a reopening, depending on the length of time that takes. And I take the final part, that may not happen all at once, because there may be a phased approach, as we're seeing in China. It may be the programming issues may occur. Different parts of the world will be impacted at different times. So some territories may have to close because there's no product availability. Others will be closing because of COVID. So how does all that tie in? And then it's re-establishing trade, which is primarily re-establishing confidence with staff and re-establishing confidence with customers. This is a safe place to be. And I guess looking through this is, there won't be one single day in the next 3 months where COVID automatically disappears. Even with China or other territories reopening, there's still a risk, but it's how great that risk is.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. Where reopening is not pulling up the shutters. It is a gradual process of communication, of programming, of encouraging people to rediscover cinema. So all of that's going to take cooperation between the cinemas, the distributors, and above all, a buy-in from the public. So I do want to get into talking a little bit about the China experience, because like I said, only in the last few days, we've had some very encouraging news. So I'm keen for us to get onto that so that people can see a light at the end of this tunnel. So Rob, did you want to talk a little bit more about state support? We've already mentioned it earlier, but is this something, do you see, that should be an effort coordinated by the trade bodies, by the large cinema chains? Is there an issue, first of all, just in terms of making governments, whether national or regional, see that cinema is not just a sort of luxury, frivolous escapism? It is an industry that supports not just tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of jobs, but with cinema becoming a part of the experience economy, as David Hancock always reminds us. The reappearance of cinemas in town centers has a halo effect because they're not just cinemas now, they're bars, they're cafes, they are focal points where attract people for the nightlife economy. So there is a value to the cinemas which maybe isn't obvious. Any thoughts on that point, Rob?
So sometimes, and I guess the festival and the art house independents may be able to come in here. There's differentiation. Multiplexes are sometimes tagged as retailers, so it makes it much more difficult for them to raise funds. And I think that's a part that perhaps the trade bodies, agencies in different markets and areas need to address. But not useful to look through what NATO put out last night in terms of, say, loan guarantees to ease liquidity, tax benefits to assist employers and support employees, relieving the burden of cost despite the ongoing closures. The tax measures could be payroll tax, could be VAT, something along any tax body or so. And I think, Patrick, if you take, I think the key point, the business model of the movie theatre is uniquely vulnerable in the present crisis. That's absolutely correct. And how that's addressed is governmental, it's local government, it's asset managers, it's the operators having the time and the capacity to do this with everything else ongoing. So yes, the trade bodies do play a pivotal role in this. Now, that notwithstanding, there are some areas of the world where there's no trade bodies, so we need to factor in how they address this issue as well.
And in the chat earlier, I saw that Italy is giving a tax waiver for certain businesses, including cinemas, until I believe sometime in April. Marcelo Lima of Tonks and Expo Cine told me yesterday that the governor of Sao Paulo in Brazil had committed, I think it was $92 million to cinemas. That just seems like an extraordinary amount to not necessarily keep cinemas open, but to keep them alive once we all come out of this. And even as we're sitting here, the news, I mean, now Minions 2 apparently has been delayed.
Because
just adding another piece in, we did a case study several years ago, but it actually sort of strikes home now. It's a location that didn't have a cinema. They added a cinema in as a leisure entity, and the footfall went up by 12% in that location, and the cinema and the food and beverage sales went up by 10%. So the answer is, it's actually the catalytic effect is it's not just the cinema, it's the other employees in the shopping centre, the vitality, primarily between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock in a lot of locations. Without the cinema, that vitality goes, and with it, other jobs and other opportunities. So cinema has a really important part to play globally in all of that.
True. Cinemas tend to be anchor clients these days in shopping malls. I know, especially in emerging markets, places like the far Southeast Asia, Gulf, India, etc., Latin America. So their importance really can't be overstressed. But I suppose they're not an obvious bailout, quote unquote, bailout target as something like an airline industry, which is more high profile and is maybe quicker and easier.
Patrick, if you take those emerging markets as one, the average ticket price will be less than $3 a head, and the European Bank Reconstruction and Development are looking for around 40% in their investments, around 40% of future shopping, leisure, and retail developments to be cinema or leisure led, not retail. So it's really critical that cinemas are supported, or again, it has an impact across those developments. And the piece we put out last night about the box office being worth $42.5 billion a year, with those 20 top 20 countries, they're not the same 20 from 5 years ago. So there's Indonesia, Malaysia, and others coming through. I think Jim put up a note earlier about, say, for Trolls, 70% of the box office may be international. So we need to be able to support those markets, those areas that are coming through.
And that's a very good segue, actually, into the final section of our kind of round table before we get to the Q&A session, which there have been so many great comments coming up here. I'm having trouble keeping up with them, but I hope that we have some questions and discussion points for the end. But I really want to take a moment now and focus on China and bringing in Dr. Hugh as well, because the timing is such that just as cinemas are shutting down in the West, we are seeing a glimmer of hope because cinemas have begun to reopen in China. As you said, Rob, they closed down on the 23rd of January, right on the eve of Chinese New Year, the biggest box office holiday in China, which meant all the films were delayed. In fact, one of them was released online to much controversy, Lost in Russia, much like Trolls 2. They had their own, or they were first to it. But now, province by province, because it's very regionally determined which areas of China are considered free of the coronavirus, Cinemas are powering back up again, but they're facing some difficulties, obviously, in terms of the content, in terms of winning people back. So if we have Dr. Hugh on the line, I'd like to hear from her really what her latest take is, and also what the news was, which I saw from her today, on the kind of titles that these first open cinemas are going to be showing, because we won't get to the blockbusters immediately. And herein lies a lesson for the cinemas in the West, for when the time comes for us here to start powering up. So Dr. Hugh, can you hear us, and are you on the line?
I am on the line. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and apologies for the technical problems. Could you tell us a bit about the situation today in China, and what are the most recent developments?
The most recent developments, apart from the 5 films which I wrote about yesterday, which are two of them are local production, was American Dreams in China, which was a 2003 film, and then Wolf Totem is a co-production between China and France in 2015, which did a very good box office. Wolf Warrior 2 from 2017, and The Wandering Earth from last year, and also surprisingly Capernaum, the films from Cannes 2 years ago, which did really well at the box office. So I think the choices of film was very careful. In particular, at the moment, the coronavirus also escalated the tension between the US and China. So ideology is still a very much big problem for the government to consider. But I think the choices of film is actually quite interesting, because is familiar with the audience to begin with, and also it has 2 so-called main melody film that keep the ideology strong enough for the Chinese. But then it also has enough foreign film just to.
We're going to see if we can get Sperling to put up your article here from your LinkedIn page, because it was a very good one in terms of providing an overview. So I should have sent the link earlier. For those who haven't read it, and who I strongly urge you to follow Dr. Hugh in terms of updates from the UK-China Council that she does. But yes, those 5 films are very interesting choices, and they're going to be very preferential to the cinemas that show them in terms of the box office split. So, Dr. Hugh. We're having some microphone problems there. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the box office for these films, just how much the cinemas will be getting. No? Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Well, I can tell you that in the re-releasing Harry Potter and the Magic Stone, which I assume is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and the original split was 43-57, and I don't know whether that will remain based on what Dr. Hugh was saying.
I think we've got Dr. Hugh back on the line. Nope. I see a message saying losing you, unfortunately. What I saw in Dr. Hughes' article was the fact that the negotiations done by China Film Group were these 5 films initially, but also for these new Warner films, with that cinemas would get to keep 100% of the box office receipts of the film. They were also encouraged to price the tickets very, very low and aggressively to encourage people to really come back and see them in the cinema. In addition, after the Harry Potter films, there was a notice, which I think came up in Forbes, by saying that it could be followed by a re-release of the 3 Lord of the Rings films, which again, the cinemas would get to keep 100%. Now, it might seem that maybe it's not the most attractive proposition to go and see an old film, particularly if it's available online, in the cinema with seat social distancing, but you haven't been locked up in a small apartment in China for 2 months. So believe you me, there will be plenty of people going out. And what's interesting about getting people out in China is that re-releases have a very strong track record. If I can get Dr. Hugh back on the line, she can comment on this, but only last year we saw the re-release of Bertolucci's 1900, The Legend of 1900, I think it was, and Life is Beautiful, the Italian Oscar winner, which both did tremendous business at the Chinese box office. So only because the film is old doesn't mean that it's not going to attract an audience, especially people who have been locked up for a long time. We've seen some statistics saying 53% of those quizzed are prepared to come out and are keen to go out and see a film in the cinema once it's re-released. But it's a very gradual process, really, of getting people, encouraging them to go back into the cinema. The other thing to note about China is, yes, they do have a backlog of films. They have the major releases, which were due to come out over the Chinese New Year, which will now have to find a new release date. We also have
some of which were distributed on streaming, by the way. Some of those were distributed.
Yes, lost in Russia, but majority of them still they're saving for now, and they didn't go out overseas either, which is very important because there's a big Chinese overseas community as well in Southeast Asia and North America and even in Europe.
And as Adam points out, some of these re-releases in China may be first-time releases in China.
Indeed, a lot of people might not have seen Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings in the cinema, and there could be other films as well. I mean, obviously, the process of getting permission to show films in China is complicated, but the government is very keen on kickstarting the cinema-going industry again. So we will likely to see maybe a loosening of what films will be permitted to be shown there. But I just wanted to add that from indications we've had now is that new releases in China, and remember, these are going to be domestic films. They are not going to be releasing Hollywood titles that are being held off elsewhere, is going to be on the 1st of May, because there's a long time needed in terms of creating public advertising, publicity, and no one is going to want to be putting their film out there until they are sure that there are A, sufficient number of cinemas open to show them, and B, that people have demonstrated that they're prepared to leave their homes and go to the cinema. And the interesting point here as well, in terms of reopening, is that I saw a detailed article in a Chinese newspaper via Google Translate. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see it, about just how they're going about reopening the cinemas. Everything from disinfecting the auditoriums to providing a safe room if somebody should feel unwell during it, to having seat separation in terms of selling the tickets, and just taking all these other measures of ensuring that people feel safe and that they're going to the cinema to enjoy themselves and not have to worry or think about the coronavirus. So we're going to be monitoring and reporting on the situation in China, because while maybe we weren't paying enough attention to China when things were going wrong and screens were shutting down, we can definitely learn from China as screens are opening. Sperling, Rob, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was just going to add, in the absence of Dr. Hugh at the moment, I was going to mention if you take the Oscar BAFTA season, there's been very few of those releases placed into China. They lost all the Chinese New Year, but 1917 is a film that's very close to Dr. Hugh's heart. She would love to see that released in China. So I guess if there's anyone out there that can help in that respect, that would be greatly appreciated on her behalf. It
will release. Dr. Hugh says it will release.
Yes, in the comment section. And yeah, that's true. That's the backlog as well of a lot of the Oscar films. So they also didn't get released. So 1917, Parasite, Little Women. There's definitely plenty of films that China could be screening while they wait for the rest of us to get around to opening our screens as well. So I'm very sorry that we weren't able to speak to Dr. Hugh Moore, but we will definitely have her back in a future session, because we very much hope to be able to do this again. I realize that we've been on for about an hour, 20 minutes, so I'd like to, with a few final words from Sperling and from Rob, wrap up this part of this session, and then we will have any questions and answers that come through. Obviously, people have been very good in terms of making comments. Maybe there are specific points we can't scroll back and see what they asked an hour ago, but if you can resend your questions or comments, we will get to them now. But I'd just like to hand out for any concluding thoughts on this part of the webinar from, first of all, Sperling, and then from Rob. So Sperling?
Well, no, I mean, the only thing I would say is I know it's been rather long, and I see the attendee list kind of dropping. So what I would say is let us know what you want to know. Tell us who we should be talking to. Tell us who should be participating in these if we do them again. Hopefully we'll get the technology worked out. Let us know what the questions and topics are. There will be an exit poll when you leave this room. So I believe it will actually ask you these same questions. So please do participate in the survey. I think the main takeaway that I have learned over the past week is there is no playbook for any of this. Everybody wants to know what the future holds. The answer is absolutely nobody knows. Whether you're in finance, whether you're in politics, whether you're in cinema, it doesn't matter. This has never happened before. So there's no way to predict what's going to happen. As many people have said in the chat, everybody from Dolby who's offering training to Christie, and Cineonic and Strong, everybody is offering support, not only for their own customers, but for everyone. So definitely reach out to the manufacturers, reach out to the integrators, because they are helping the industry out.
Thank you very much, Sperling. And also I saw a comment from Dr. Hugh. She wanted to make the point that this is an opportunity maybe for China to open up to more Western films, and there's definitely going to be changes after this. So,
Yes. Hello? Frozen again.
Okay, well, I don't know. I guess something has happened here. I don't know whether Patrick is still with us.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. I don't think he is at the moment. I'll just have to quick round up. I mean, I think the key piece here, as Bella, you said, all of that feedback to see what the key issues are, what needs to be addressed going forward, and to keep in contact. I think great the comments or commentary around here about keeping in touch and feedback.
Yes, and please keep talking to your customers, because if your customers are hearing from you, I mean, don't overdo it, obviously, but whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or directly through email, they will want to know that you're still out there, you're going to be back. And as some people have commented, once theaters reopen and the releases start flowing again, it's going to take some time to market those releases. So again, we might be showing films that have played previously, that might even be on streaming services already. So again, there's no rule book. And Dr. Hugh says that she will do her best to translate the policy from China moving forward. And I think at this point, maybe what we'll do is, for now, I see some questions coming in from the Q&A. Todd H, who might be, Todd Hoddick from Cineonic and Barco, says they are actively brainstorming to support the industry. Again, all the manufacturers are trying to find ways to support the industry. So again, reach out to them, reach out to your landlords, and we will hopefully be in touch shortly to figure out if we're going to do this again, and if so, what the topics should be and who should be participating. And so really, thank you all for hanging in there through our stumbling through this. I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully at Cine Europe, if not sooner.